Moving along, we're going to take our rock grass sprites here and start making some obstacles. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the rock grass sprite, drag and drop it into my hierarchy, and I'm going to set its position Y to negative 2.5. Now, right at this moment, we can't see it, so I'm going to adjust the sorting layer to foreground. I'm going to add a polygon collider like we did before and take a look at this so we can see where this object is. And so based off of our code, what we're going to do is we're going to want to be able to shift this up and down. You're going to see these are going to come in pairs with the object coming from the top. So let's drag and drop the rock grass down in there. Again, let's make its sorting order the foreground. And let's make its Y positive 2.5. And again, we're going to add a polygon collider 2D to it. Ignore that. Polygon collider 2D. And we're going to make a parent for these objects. So I'm going to create an empty game object. I'm going to rename this obstacle. I'm going to make sure the obstacle is zeroed out, and we're going to put both of these rock grass objects as children of the obstacle. Alright, so we'll make a script that generates these obstacles. So I'm going to create a new script. I'm going to call this obstacle behavior. And let's open that up to work on. Alright, our obstacle behavior, I'm going to inherit from our repeating background so that we can have these. And the reason we're inheriting it is, again, because of this protected virtual off screen. What we're going to do is every time we see virtual, we're going to override that with a custom method. We're going to do that in obstacle behavior. So I'm going to change mono behavior here to repeating background so it inherits from that. I'm going to ditch start and update here, and what we're going to do is I'm going to make a protected override for the method off screen. And again, we have this reference vector 3. So what happens when we pre-fill all this in is we're saying we're going to use this off-screen method right here, where we have this position x plus equals 2 times this scroll width. That is going to be run right here in this line base offset, a base off screen. But what we're going to do is we're going to change that line to just destroy this game object. So when this object gets off screen, at the proper vector 3 position, it will be destroyed. And we're going to create a volume in there so when the player passes safely through this area right here, we're going to give them a point. We're going to add to their score. So we're eventually going to make a volume in here that will allow the player to pass through and get points. So I'm going to put that in here. I'm going to say public void on trigger enter 2D. And if we hit that with our player, then we're going to tell our game controller to run the score and add 1. Alright, so we're going to reach into our game controller. We're going to go down here and we're going to run this where we set that score to a new value and then push it to the UI. Alright, so that's our obstacle script. Going to save that. We'll put a copy of that obstacle behavior onto that parent obstacle object. And in the inspector for our scroll speed, I'm going to match what our foreground is, which is currently set at 5. And we're going to create a prefab out of this obstacle by dragging and dropping it onto our prefabs folder. And so I'm going to now delete the obstacle from my hierarchy, go to my game controller, because now we have the object that's going to be our obstacle reference. So I can drag and drop that in there. And we can start running with our start of our game. If I were to press play here, we still don't get the start of any of that sort of behavior. And the reason we're not is because obstacle behavior isn't running start. We do have a start right here that sets some pieces, and we have a method here to create them, but nothing's actually calling or getting the game going. So I'm going to create a script that'll get the game going and then hand off functionality to everything else. The script I'm going to make is called game start behavior. So in this script, I'm going to say we have a reference to the player object. So I'm going to say private game object. I'll refer to it as player. And inside of start, that game object, I'm going to say game object dot find the object called plane. And then we're going to set this object to is kinematic, which basically will remove the gravity aspect from this object. So I'm going to say player dot get component rigid body 2D dot dot is kinematic. We're going to set it to true. And so every single frame after the game starts, we're going to start the game where if input dot get key up, we're looking for the spacebar, or input dot get mouse button down button 0. Then after 1 second, we will spawn obstacles every 1.5 seconds. So my game controller, refer to as controller, is equal to get component game controller. And then once I have that controller, I'm going to invoke a repeating method. In this case, create obstacle. And we're going to do that every 1 second. Well, we're going to start after 1 second, and then we're going to repeat 1.5 seconds. Make sure you name that method correctly. Again, that is here inside of this method. If you want to, you can copy that and paste it in here so that you indeed have it named exactly as you want. or as we need. And then after the game is going, we want the plane to start falling now. Okay, so that would be my player dot get component, the rigid body 2D, and this time is kinematic would then equal false, so that gravity will then take over. And finally, once the game is going, we can destroy this script. All right, so what does all this mean? When the player starts a game, our player is kinematic set to true, which means it's not going to fall. It's just going to hang there. And so the player, whenever they're ready, they take the deep breath and they're ready to go. They're either going to press the space bar or the left mouse button. It's going to wait a second and then start creating obstacles. And the plane will start falling, at which point we will destroy this script. All right, so we're going to add this object, or this component rather, the game start behavior, to our game controller. Now we can do that either in Unity or we could do it here inside of our script. What I'm going to do is inside of start of my game controller, I'm going to say game object dot add component. We're going to add a game start behavior script. All right. So I'm going to come back here to Unity. I'm going to select my game controller. And I'm going to press play. All right. And so we're seeing a little bit of strange stuff happening here. Our plane is falling. It fell all the way through the world, still going down. And the reason it's going down is because of our forces that we currently have on our plane. If we remember back to how our plane was built, every single frame, our velocity is set back to 0. And so these are actually compounding to make our plane fall forever. All right. So our game controller here, when I press play, you can see it adds the game start behavior. But now if I start clicking, now the game's on. And I hit an obstacle and I crashed. And so what this does is it allows the player a few moments here. Okay, now we're ready to start going. Here come the obstacles. And right now they're just being created at the exact same height every 1.5 seconds. I'm sorry, at the exact position every 1.5 seconds, but remember their position is being generated at random values between negative 1.3 and positive 1.3 right here. All right, so far so good. So I'm going to make a game end behavior. So I'm going to create a new script, game end behavior, and open that up. Now if the game's over, I want to be able to load and unload scenes. So I'm going to say using Unity engine .scene management. And so for our variables, what we want to do is we want to stop the player from quitting the game until a certain amount of time has passed. So I'm going to say private bool can quit equals false, meaning they can't quit the game yet. And so inside of false, inside of start, when this gets called, basically the game should be over, because this script is only going to run when that game is over. So we're going to run a coroutine. And that coroutine, what we're going to do is make it right underneath start here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say delay the player from being able to restart the game immediately. So this is going to be an I enumerator. This is my coroutine, and I'm going to call it delay quit. Put a space in there. At this point, we're going to get an error on this coroutine, and we'll have that error until we have some kind of return value. So we'll go ahead and we'll code up this coroutine, then we'll come back into start and start putting together how it's going to run. So I want to give the player time before ending the game. So I'm going to put the keyword yield, and then I'm going to say return new wait 4 seconds. So I'm going to wait half a second. So the code's going to pause for 1/2 second, and then we're going to say after 0.5 seconds have passed, continue here. And so we will then allow can quit to become true. Okay, we're not going to need to update in here either because the game will be over. And so here's my return value. Here's what happens after that return happens. So when this gets called, what we're going to do is we're going to start that coroutine down there. So I'm going to say start coroutine called delay quit. Okay, so if this happens, we no longer need to spawn obstacles. So I'm going to get my game controller, I'll refer to as controller. And what we're going to do is find the game object called game controller. And then get the component called game controller. So we've created a pointer to that game controller object, and then we're going to run this new method called cancel invoke. And what cancel invoke does is it cancels all invoked calls. So what that means is our game controller right here has been instantiating obstacles over and over and over again. If the game ends, we no longer have to run that. So by calling this method called cancel invoke, it's going to stop everything that's being invoked over and over again. Okay. So now that we have our start and our delay script, now what we want to do is allow the player to restart. And I guess I got a little bit ahead of myself. We can put this inside of update. What we want to do is we want to check to see if the player has pressed space or left mouse button. We want to restart if true. So I'll go ahead and put back update. in there, and I'm going to say if our input dot get key up, we're looking for space, or input dot get mouse button down, I'll look for mouse button 0, and can quit, which is right here, that time has passed. So if can quit is true, then what we're going to do is we will say restart the scene that is currently loaded. So I'm going to say scene manager dot, we're going to say load scene, and we're just going to get the active scene. So I'm going to say scene manager dot get active scene, specifically its name. And save it. All right, one last thing we're going to do is inside of our player behavior script, we'll come back over here. And so what we're going to finally do is, as we move along here in our game, if we do collide with one of those obstacles, we want to create the end game behavior so we can restart. So the player's been hit, things stop moving, the animation stops playing. I'm going to say if not game object dot get component game end behavior. All right, so what does that mean? It means if we don't currently have a script attached to this player named game end behavior, then we're going to add one. So I'm going to say game object dot add component game end behavior. Now here's the beauty of how this works. This script, which if you'll recall, has a start, which means everything's going to start happening the moment this script is created. The script isn't even in our scene until our player has hit an obstacle. So that's pretty nice. Let's test that out. I'm going to save it. I'm going to come in here. Okay, so I'm giving a few seconds for my player to start. I'm starting to go. Dodging obstacles, I crash, and after 1.5 seconds I should be able to click again and we're back in the game. Crash again. We'll take a look at how that looks on our object, the plane. You can see down here is that game end behavior because it was added because I hit that obstacle. Come back and I start running again. And we're good until we hit another obstacle. So that prevents me from, just spamming it through here. And there we go. All right, so the last thing we're going to kind of fold in here is our point system. Let's create a new UI text object. So I'm going to go to UI text. All right, so I have that text object selected. I'm going to select my anchor presets button. I'm going to put it in the top center. So I'm going to hold Alt and Shift, put it there in my top center. I'm going to change the name of this object to my score text. I'm going to change, let's see, it's kind of small right now. I'm going to make the height 50, make it a little bit larger, and put 0 in there as the current score. I'm going to center it up here in my alignment as well. I'm gonna make it larger in font so it's easy for the player to see. You can also change the color of this to whatever color you want. You don't want it to conflict with the background too much. We can also mess with this font a little bit. If you click Add Component and start typing out the word outline, you can see there's an outline component. And when I did that, it added a stroke around it. And we can make that stroke whatever color we want as well. You can make it white, black, whatever you feel like. Just makes it a little bit nicer in there. Let's see, what else do we want to do? Down here, in that stroke or that outline, it has its own alpha, so you can ramp up, how intense that outline is. And if you change this effect distance, if I tell it, 2, you can see it makes that stroke or that outline wider. So I'm going to do that on the X and Y, so that's a nice large stroke around that. So looking pretty good. I'm going to save that scene. To get the point system together, I'm going to drag and drop my obstacle prefab in here and set it up in my scene view so it's easier to see. I'm going to turn off my background temporarily here so I can see the gap between here. So earlier I talked about making the parent on like a background, or in this case the parent for the obstacle. We can now add components to the parent and have the children be unaffected by it. So I'm going to add component. I'm going to put a box collider 2D on it. You can see the default will put it right at the center of the obstacles transform, so that will work. And what we're going to do is we're going to set this to is trigger, because if we don't, our plane will smash right into it, so that wouldn't be good. And what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the size of this right here. We can do this manually by hitting this box right here. We can stretch these things out so that if the player gets through, then we'll give them a point, something along those lines. Make sure that they clear that. All right. And I'm going to update this prefab. I can either drag and drop it right here on the prefabs, or I can click this overrides and tell it to apply all, at which point my prefab now has that box collider on it. I'm going to go ahead and delete that obstacle out of there and turn my background back on. And what we're going to do is we're going to test this out. I'm going to press play. Remember, my plane's going to drop slowly until I start clicking. Then obstacles are going to start getting generated. I fly through, I get a point, get another point. I'm getting points all the way through here. If I crash, give it a second, or half a second rather, start clicking again, my score backs to 0, start clicking, and we're off flying again. And this is our finished game.